The leaders of US and China stressed their shared responsibility to avoid conflict in their first ever virtual summit. US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping held the video call at a time of worsening relations between the superpowers. There's no shortage of tension over issues like Taiwan and human rights, flashpoints in a rivalry that dominates the global stage.
As 3 hours of virtual meetings wrapped up, the leaders of the US and China could agree on one thing: get out of each other's way. The two nations stressed the need for their competition to remain peaceful.
As I've said before, it seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says cooperation benefits not only the US and China, but also the world. Right now, both China and the United States are at critical stages of development, and humanity lives in a global village, and we face multiple challenges together. As the world's two largest economies and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and the US need to increase communication and cooperation. It was a public attempt at lowering the temperatures between the two superpowers amid rising tensions. But in private, disagreements were raised in the meeting. Policy towards Taiwan continued to separate the two, with Xi saying any US interference is like playing with fire. Beijing claims that the self-governing island is part of China, while the US has vowed to protect Taiwanese independence. Biden raised China's human rights record in Hong Kong, Tibet and Xinjiang, also expressing their concern at China's buildup of nuclear weapons. But China was quick to point out that their stockpile is much smaller than the one in the United States. No agreements or announcements are expected to come from this summit, but the two leaders welcomed the opportunity for frank conversations.
For more, I'm joined by DW correspondent, Washington correspondent Oliver Salet and Beijing-based journalist Fabian Kretschmer. Oliver, let's start with you. Biden initiated this virtual meeting to help diffuse tensions. Now, did he get what he was hoping for?
Well, Tommy, he did certainly not go into these consultations with big expectations with regards to the outcome. So what he wanted to do here is to revive some good old diplomacy, if you will, knowing that this is probably the best way to avoid confrontation of the two countries. Actually, this virtual summit, this virtual meeting, was considered the first formal meeting between the two presidents. If you take out some phone calls that were made throughout the year, they have never met in person since President Biden took office, and that's almost 1 year ago. So we have the two biggest economies at the table here, with military active in the same region, so certainly a long overdue conversation.
Fabian, let's come to you now. Xi Jinping called for more communication and cooperation between the two sides. Do you see any scope for that?
Well, if you listen closely, then Xi Jinping even called Joe Biden an old friend. And of course, this is just symbolic rhetoric, but it is meaningful because we come from really the worst bilateral relations of the two countries in more than 3 decades. And so it shows really a genuine attempt that China is hoping for a restart of bilateral relations. And Xi Jinping singled out basically two fields for cooperation. And one is the global climate change, and the other one is the pandemic. And those probably are the two fields where there's the biggest overlap of interests between these two countries, and probably the only fields where we can see immediate cooperation.
These so-called old friends, Oliver, the US and China, are at odds over many issues. Which one do you think was the thorniest in this meeting?
Well, first of all, this meeting was held behind closed doors. There were no cameras and only a few statements have been made public. until now. What we heard from the White House just a little while ago is that President Biden apparently was critical of unfair trade practices. It's certainly an old story that we've heard under the Trump administration and even before many, many times. The future of Taiwan was tackled with the U.S. commitment, of course, and then human rights abuses, Tibet, Hong Kong, Xinjiang. Another topic that could have been on the agenda is cybersecurity. So the list is really long, as you can see, and there are really few areas of common ground. One exception is climate change, and we also heard of Chinese state media that China reportedly vowed to open its economy further for U.S. companies. That would certainly be a substantial outcome and an achievement for the Biden administration.
Fabian, realistically, when it comes to these issues, and Oliver has mentioned quite a list of them, is China really open for compromise?
Well, on the economic issues, yes, but the core issues, let's say Taiwan and also the human rights violations, we know for sure that China under Xi Jinping will not move an inch from their position. I know that clearly because when I'm in exchange with the diplomats here, they tell me that, back in the days before Xi Jinping, they would at least listen to our critique. But now basically there's no exchange anymore. There's not even a consensus on the factual foundation of those issues. For example, in Xinjiang, I mean, basically the government here does not acknowledge the camps at all. They call them re-education training centers, etc. And also they call very openly for unification with Taiwan. I don't see, to be honest, any compromise. It's simply not possible. So we are hopeful that at least the tone is getting better and more friendly. But in the future, those conflicts will remain and will not disappear at all.
Okay, Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing and Oliver Sallet in Washington. Many thanks to you both.